Welcome to our deep dive into power and politics and organizations. We've got research excerpts, articles, even a YouTube video here. Looks like we're going to get seriously smart about how influence really works.
Absolutely. Understanding these dynamics can be really crucial for anyone trying to navigate organizational life, whether you're leading a team, collaborating with colleagues, or even just aiming to make your voice heard.
You know, it's funny. We often think of power as this big dramatic thing,
Yeah.
but the sources we have here really highlight how it shows up in these subtle ways every day. Like, did you know that even the layout of office space can influence who holds power?
It's true. There's actually a study here that suggests that even the layout of an office can impact who holds power.
Wow.
When you think about it, if your desk is tucked away in a corner versus being in a central high-traffic area,
Yeah.
it really affects your ability to interact with others, gather information, or just be seen and heard.
Huh. I never thought about it that way. So before we go any further, let's actually define this concept of power. Why is it so important to understand how it works, especially in the context of our careers?
Well, at its core, power is the ability to influence the behavior of other people to achieve some desired outcome.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The sources we have emphasize this concept of dependence as being central to power dynamics.
Okay, so unpack that for me. What does dependence have to do with power?
Well, think of it this way. The more someone relies on you for resources, information, or even approval,
Uh-huh.
the more potential power you have in that relationship. This means that even if you don't have a fancy title or official authority, you can still wield a significant amount of influence if you possess something that others need or value.
So like a junior team member with specialized technical skills that everyone needs could actually have more power than a manager in certain situations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their expertise makes them indispensable, giving them leverage even within a hierarchical structure. Reminds me of the Steve Jobs case study that you included. Talk about someone who understood how to accumulate and utilize different types of power.
Oh, that's a perfect example. Jobs obviously had legitimate power as the CEO of Apple.
Right.
But he was also a master at cultivating other forms of power, like his reality distortion field, the
Right.
sheer force of his personality and vision.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect illustration of what French and Raven call referent power.
Hmm.
People were drawn to his charisma and inspired by his vision, giving him a level of influence that extended far beyond his formal authority.
So it wasn't just about him giving orders, people wanted to follow him.
Precisely.
Huh.
And this brings us to a key insight from our sources. Personal power rooted in expertise, strong relationships,
Right.
charisma. It can often be more effective than formal power, which is based solely on your position within an organization.
Okay, so it's not just about climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
It's about developing those personal qualities that make you a valuable and sought-after asset regardless of your title.
Exactly. And while formal power structures certainly exist, these sources suggest that truly effective leaders understand how to cultivate and utilize all six bases of power identified by French and Raven: legitimate reward, coercive expert information, and referent.
Okay.
They know when to leverage each type for maximum impact.
But I imagine there are ethical considerations here, right? The sources did caution against relying too heavily on coercive power, for example.
Yes, using fear or threats might get you compliance in the short term,
Sure.
but it can create a toxic environment and erode trust in the long run. Studies actually show that leaders who rely primarily on coercive power often experience higher turnover and lower team morale.
That makes sense. So focusing on building those personal sources of power, like expertise and strong relationships,
Yeah.
it's not just more effective, it's also more ethical and sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. It's about creating a win-win situation where you're achieving your goals
Uh-huh.
while also fostering a positive and productive work environment.
This is already shifting my entire perspective on power. It's not about dominating others.
Right.
It's about mastering the art of influence, understanding how to inspire and motivate people to achieve shared goals.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of influence, the sources you provided also delve into some very specific tactics that we could use to persuade others and achieve desired outcomes.
All right, let's dive into that. I'm ready to learn some Jedi mind tricks.
Well, I wouldn't call them mind tricks exactly,
Okay.
but these tactics are certainly backed by research and can be incredibly powerful when used ethically and strategically.
Okay. Give me the goods. What kind of tactics are we talking about?
Well, one of the most effective tactics is what's called rational persuasion. Using logic data and well-reasoned arguments to convince others of your viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about appealing to people's sense of reason, and objectivity.
So it's like building a solid case.
Yes.
Presenting the evidence and letting the facts speak for themselves.
Exactly. But there's also a place for appealing to emotions, what we call inspirational appeals. Tapping into people's values, aspirations, and emotions can be incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to rally support for a shared vision or goal.
This makes me think of like great leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. or Nelson Mandela.
Absolutely.
They didn't just present facts, they ignited people's passions and inspired them to action.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there are tactics like consultation and involving others in the decision-making process
Okay.
to increase buy-in. And then there's ingratiation, building rapport and goodwill through genuine compliments and appreciation.
Okay. Ingratiation sounds a bit manipulative.
It can be if used insincerely,
Yeah.
but when it's done authentically, it's simply about building positive relationships and showing genuine appreciation for others.
Mm-hmm.
People are much more likely to be receptive to your ideas if they feel valued and respected.
So it's about building trust, not just buttering people up.
Precisely. And speaking of trust, one of the most surprising insights from this research is how even subtle changes in communication can significantly impact our ability to influence others.
Yeah.
For instance, did you know that simply using the word because when making a request dramatically increases the likelihood of compliance?
Seriously, just adding that one word makes a difference.
That's a fascinating finding.
Yeah.
It seems that our brains are wired to respond positively when we are provided with a rationale,
Wow.
even if it's brief or seemingly obvious.
Wow, that's wild. Makes you wonder how much we operate on autopilot, responding to these tiny cues without even realizing it.
It speaks to the power of being deliberate and thoughtful in our communication,
Yeah.
especially when we're trying to influence others. And while there are many effective tactics, the research also cautions against relying on pressure or coercive tactics, as they often backfire.
So threatening people or using guilt trips is a no-go.
Those tactics might get people to comply in the short term, but they damage relationships, erode trust, and ultimately diminish your influence. Remember, building sustainable influence is about creating win-win situations, not forcing people into submission.
This is all so insightful. But knowing about these tactics is one thing. How do we actually apply them effectively in real-world situations? Especially when things get complicated, like when we're dealing with office politics.
That's a great question, and one that we'll delve into further in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore how to navigate the often murky world of organizational politics
Right.
while staying true to your values and building your influence ethically. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. In part one, we talked about different types of power influence tactics and the importance of social networks. Now I'm curious, how can we actually use all this knowledge to navigate those tricky situations that always seem to pop up in the workplace?
Well, it's all about being strategic and knowing when to adapt.
Yeah.
One key insight from the sources we have here is that not all office politics is bad. Sometimes you actually need to understand the political landscape to advocate for your team, to protect your own interests, or even just to get a good idea through all the bureaucracy.
So it's like that saying, you have to play the game, but how do you play the game without compromising your values?
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's say you have a fantastic idea that needs resources from another department, but, the official channels are just a black hole.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of giving up, understanding the political landscape means figuring out who the key influencers are in that other department, what their priorities are, and how to build alliances that benefit everyone.
So it's less about backstabbing and more about strategic relationship building.
Exactly. You're not manipulating people. You're finding win-win solutions.
Okay.
You're using your knowledge of the power dynamics to get things done in a way that aligns everyone's interests.
That makes a lot of sense. But our sources also warn about the downsides of power, right?
Absolutely. As we said before, power can be intoxicating. When people feel powerful, they can become overconfident, less empathetic, and more likely to take risks sometimes with disastrous consequences.
Yikes. So how do we guard against that power trip?
Humility is crucial.
Okay.
Surround yourself with people who will challenge you and help you see your blind spots. Actively seek out diverse perspectives to get a more complete picture of any situation.
That's like a system of checks and balances. You
Okay.
need people to hold you accountable and prevent you from going off the rails.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this brings us to leadership.
Okay.
The most effective leaders are those who can navigate power dynamics, Build consensus and influence people in a way that feels authentic and ethical.
So it's not just about giving orders or wielding authority.
Not at all.
Okay.
It's about empowering others,
Mm.
fostering collaboration, and creating an environment where everyone feels valued and respected.
Mm-hmm.
The sources we have here really emphasize building trust as the foundation for effective leadership.
You can't just demand trust, though, can you?
No, you have to earn it. You earn it by being reliable, keeping your promises, and communicating openly and honestly, even when it's tough.
Yeah.
It also means treating others with respect, even when you disagree.
So how do you actually build that kind of trust in the workplace?
It starts with small actions.
Okay.
Be consistent.
Mm.
Follow through on your commitments, and be transparent about your intentions.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake, own up to it. People are much more likely to trust you if they believe you're acting with integrity.
This makes me think about the role of emotional intelligence in all of this.
That's a key piece of the puzzle.
Mm.
Emotionally intelligent leaders are self-aware, empathetic, and good at managing their own emotions and understanding the emotions of others.
Right.
They can read a room, sense what people are feeling, and build rapport based on that understanding.
It's like they have a sixth sense for navigating those interpersonal dynamics.
In a way, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it ties back to everything we've been discussing: power politics, leadership, trust, emotional intelligence. It all works together. You can't really separate one from the other.
This is really starting to click for me. It's giving me a much clearer picture of how to navigate the workplace in a more strategic and thoughtful way.
That's great to hear. And remember, understanding power is not about becoming some Machiavellian mastermind.
Right.
It's about using your influence ethically to achieve positive outcomes for yourself, your team, and your organization.
Exactly. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll get even more practical. We'll explore specific strategies and tactics you can use to build your power, expand your influence, and navigate the challenges of the workplace with confidence and integrity. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. It's been fascinating, hasn't it?
It really has. We've explored so much: the complexities of power dynamics, influence tactics, the importance of trust and emotional intelligence.
Yeah, we've covered a ton of ground. But now I'm ready to get tactical.
Mm.
What are some concrete strategies that people can actually use to build their own power and influence in the workplace?
That's a great question. Yeah. And one that I'm sure a lot of people are asking. Based on all the research we've looked at, one of the most powerful strategies is to cultivate expertise.
So become that go-to person for something.
Exactly. Find a niche, a skill set, a knowledge area where you can truly excel. And this doesn't have to be something super technical either.
Huh.
It can be anything from creative problem solving to project management to just being incredibly good at building relationships.
So it's about becoming indispensable, the person that everyone wants on their team.
Right. When you're the one with the answers or the solutions, your influence naturally expands. But expertise alone isn't enough.
Right. That's where building a strong network comes in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize that it's not just about collecting business cards or LinkedIn connections.
Uh-huh.
It's about being strategic about who you connect with. Build relationships with people at all levels of your organization, across different departments, and even outside your company. You never know where those connections might lead.
So it's about more than just knowing the right people. It's about building genuine relationships and creating a network that can actually support your goals.
I couldn't have said it better myself. But there's another piece to this puzzle: visibility.
Okay.
It's not enough to just do great work.
Yeah.
You have to make sure the right people know about it.
Ah, the dreaded self-promotion. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people struggle with that. It can feel kind of uncomfortable to toot your own horn. But you're right. If no one knows about your accomplishments, how can they actually value your contributions?
It is a delicate balance.
Yeah.
You don't want to be obnoxious or a brag. But you do need to find ways to showcase your value.
Mm-hmm.
Share your accomplishments with your manager, present your ideas in meetings, volunteer for high-profile projects, find opportunities to shine.
Okay, I can see that. So we've got expertise, networking, and visibility. What about those times when you're in a position of less power? Say you're early in your career or you're working in a very hierarchical environment. What can you do to build influence in those situations?
One strategy is to find strength in numbers.
Yeah.
Build coalitions with others who share your goals or concerns.
Okay.
There's power in collective action.
Mm.
It can amplify your voice
Mm-hmm.
and make it harder to be ignored.
Right. Because even if you don't have a lot of individual power, a group of people working together can really create change. What else?
Don't underestimate the power of your unique strengths,
Yeah.
no matter how small they seem. Maybe you have a particular skill that's valuable to your team,
Yeah.
or you're really good at resolving conflicts.
Yeah.
Find those leverage points and use them to your advantage.
So it's about being resourceful and finding ways to contribute, even if you're not in a formal position of authority.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And remember, influence isn't a fixed trait. It's something you can cultivate and develop over time.
Okay.
Embrace a growth mindset experiment with different approaches.
Huh.
Learn from your experiences, and don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. As we wrap up, what final thoughts or advice would you give our listeners about navigating the world of power and influence?
I would say use your influence wisely. Power is best used in service of others. Think about the impact you want to have on the world and use your influence to create positive change.
That's a great message to end on. It's not about dominating others. It's about making a difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And to our listeners, remember, the power to shape your own destiny is within your grasp.